Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode, Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about Walk the Line, starring Joaquin Phoenix as country legend Johnny Cash and Reese Witherspoon as his second wife, June Carter Cash. And Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
This movie contains depictions of child death, substance abuse, homicidal table saws, adultery, emotional abuse, child abuse, shrewish first spouses, underage groupies, occasional use of a particularly loathsome antebellum ethnic slur for a Black person, and also country music. Can you think of anything I may have left out?
Nope, that covers it. And Rena, can you give us the spoiler warning?
Yes, spoiler warning! We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Some of the sources we used in creating this episode include A History of Rock Music in 500 Songs, the episode on Johnny Cash, the Trashy Divorces podcast. Love that podcast so much. Ken Burns' country music documentary, the book Johnny Cash, The Life by Robert Hilburn.
And also, I worked at Billboard from 2014 to 2020.
So, yes. So Rena has insights.
So, Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about Johnny Cash and about the movie Walk the Line?
So about the film from our friends at Wikipedia, Walk the Line is a 2005 film directed by James Mangold. The screenplay was written by Mangold and Gil Dennis, and it is based on two autobiographies by the American singer-songwriter Johnny Cash, Man in Black, his own story in his own words, and Cash, the autobiography. The film follows Cash's early life, his romance with singer June Carter, his ascent in the country music scene, and his drug addiction. It stars Joaquin Phoenix as Cash, Reese Witherspoon as June Carter, Jennifer Goodwin as Johnny Cash's first wife, Vivian Liberto, and Robert Patrick as Johnny Cash's dad. So this movie premiered at the Telluride Film Festival in September of 2005. It was theatrically released that November, very much Oscar-batory. It received very positive reviews. Box office success. It grossed almost $200 million on a $28 million budget. It won Reese Witherspoon an Academy Award and was nominated for a slew of other awards, including Best Actor, Best Sound, Best Costume Design, and Best Film Editing.
This movie was one of my impetuses for creating this podcast because for about 2 decades, I had been thinking, why would anyone pay money for a soundtrack with recordings of Joaquin Phoenix and Reese Witherspoon singing as Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash? Since we started doing this, you've made me more irritable toward lip syncing, but at the same time, I still would prefer to hear the real thing over an imitation. I think either stars need to get better at lip syncing, or the general audience needs to stop being a bunch of hopelessly middle-brow, zero-taste idiots who will actually buy things with movie stars who are not as talented as the person they are portraying, singing as that person. And then my problem would go away.
Indeed. And a little tiny bit about our friend Johnny Cash from our friends at Wikipedia. John R. Cash was born in 1932. He passed on September 12, 2003. He was an American singer-songwriter. Most of Cash's music contains themes of sorrow, moral tribulation, and redemption, especially songs from the later stages of his career. Johnny Cash wore a trademark all-black stage wardrobe, which earned him the nickname the Man in Black. There's so much more to him than what I just read, but I'm not in the habit of reading Wikipedia on the podcast because everyone has the internet at home. I have very, very mixed feelings about this film that make me sort of like a tainted juror in looking at this, because I saw Dewey Cox before I saw this, which was a mistake. Hindsight is 20, but we probably shouldn't have gone into watching like the movie that is the template for music biopics after watching a movie as crazy and inventive as Listomania. And also, we probably shouldn't have watched this a month after we watched another James Mangold movie. And I will get into it, but this is a movie that, you know, in 2025, James Mangold could sue himself for plagiarism.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll deal with that as we get there. And I know it worked and it was a success, but it feels like it was made for the very purpose of winning awards and being a prestige film.
There are scenes in this movie that I could have sworn were in Dewey Cox. And there were scenes I thought I remembered seeing in this movie where I realized, oh no, those were in Dewey Cox making fun of this movie. And this movie and Ray, which are the chief movies parodied in Dewey Cox, are really pretty much the template for the musical biopic going forward. This is sort of a cynical example of a film being made for the specific purpose of winning awards for actors who want that prestige aside from their mass market stuff.
I have like a Frank Costanza level of like irritable outrage about this movie watching it in the present day.
I love American 4, the album that Johnny Cash did right before he died. I love Live at Folsom Prison. The moment on that album when he sings I Shot a Man in Reno Just to Watch Him Die, the cheer that goes up from the crowd is one of the most electrifying moments I've ever heard on recording, because much like what you say about a sign that a movie is good, that it makes you feel unsafe, that moment makes me feel unsafe. And then there's also the moment in there that made me fall in love with June Carter Cash, where he introduces her and she says, "It's good to be back in Folsom," and just puts the crowd at their ease, because she's probably the first woman that they've laid eyes on in years, let alone a clean, pretty one. And she's up there without fear, just greeting them.
I love that album also. And I have a lot of like for Johnny Cash as an individual and as an artist. But you know who I don't like? Johnny Cash in this movie. He's a real douchebag.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we open at the Folsom Prison concert.
So we open with the most common framing device, which is to start later on, when the character in a musical biopic is already famous, show a moment that is in some way evocative for them, and then cut back to childhood. We have seen this used over and over again. And then we've also seen this style of framing device taken to its Baroque/Rococo excesses when it is repeated several times in different ways, as we saw in Gotti, where they have 4 different forms of flashback framing device to try to find some way to get you interested because they are desperate. So at least Walk the Line only does this once. And so the men of Folsom Prison are clapping, and the Tennessee Three, Cash's backing band, is waiting on stage for him, doing the thing where they're repeating the rhythm, waiting for him to like come on stage, and he's keeping them waiting. He's getting ready to record his live album at Folsom Prison, and we see a table saw. It is the impetus for a flashback, and we cut back to his childhood when the name on his birth certificate is JR.
I don't know if you've ever used a table saw. When I did theater in college, we did everything. Like, we built our own sets. I have operated a table saw on many occasions, and those things are fucking terrifying. I look back and I'm like, who let me do that? And you know me, I can't parallel park a car, use a table saw repeatedly. There's an inherent danger in that table saw that is a very real thing you should be afraid of.
And this table saw looks very sinister. It kind of reminds me of the insides of the mouths of the sandworms in Dune a little, in terms of the pointy things.
And also, To be clear, Filmdom has not seen an inanimate object this sinister since the telephone in Cape Fear.
Agreed. So little J.R. Cash, the story is that his parents couldn't agree on a name, so he was always J.R. It said J.R. on his birth certificate, and he became John R. Cash when he joined the Air Force because our armed services insist that people have actual names, not just initials, but the R never stood for anything. We are in a scene we have seen before, which is listening to the battery-operated radio with the country music show on. We saw this in Coal Miner's Daughter, and they're listening to the Carter family, and he hears little June on there, and she's his favorite out of the Carters, and his brother Jack, who wants to be a preacher, is studying the Bible. So their dad is played by bad Terminator Robert Patrick. And we cut to the Cash family picking cotton in the fields, and we establish the role of music as a source of sanity in this family.
This segment is mercifully brief. Like, it does keep moving, but it walks right up to like simple Jack level parody between like the talking about like the scripture, the selling daddy's piano, and the sharecropping. He and his brother are talking about the weather being hot, which is always really interesting. And they're talking about how his brother wants to be a preacher someday and he knows all the scripture. They're laying this pipe so hard that this kid is about to bite it. He might as well take out a picture of his sweetheart back home and talk about how he is going to marry her after this one last mission.
He's quite young to be doing that.
Like, if you didn't know that that table saw was about to cut him in half real bad, you'd be like, oh, he's about to die.
Yeah. So the brothers are carrying fishing rods and laughing, and they're referencing Looney Tunes.
We see Jack go toward the table saw of doom because he has been offered $1 if he cuts up this whole pile of wood, and JR doesn't want to wait for him, so Jack sends him to go fishing and says he'll meet up with him later.
So is JR supposed to be the younger brother or Jack?
I think JR is supposed to be the younger brother.
Why is the younger brother guilt-tripped for not supervising the older one operating a table saw? Should the guilt trip not be upon the adults for not supervising them using this table saw?
I think the guilt trip is about if he had been there, maybe he could have saved him.
Or they could have both died. I don't know how that would have happened. Or he could have lost a hand and never become Johnny Cash. We certainly would not know that because there would be no movie.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, table saws are unpredictable, but I think the impetus for the responsibility that he feels is that if he had been there, he might have been able to get help more quickly, and therefore he wouldn't have died.
I think that minors should not be operating a table saw unsupervised. And am I being classist here? Am I projecting coastal elite upper middle class values onto poor people living in the rural South?
No, I think like there's a vast array of both mechanical equipment, like farming equipment, and and construction equipment that children should not be allowed to use. And a table saw would be one of them. And I don't care what era it is, like the machine is bigger than him.
It is 100% on bad Terminator that his kid has a table saw accident.
Yeah, honestly, the guy who asked him to do it should be in a little bit of trouble too. And in our more litigious age, you could probably sue him. No child should be using a table saw. They are incredibly dangerous.
Yes.
Like, he could have raked leaves or swept up sawdust or something else, but like he should not have been given free rein to use that table saw.
No. And so JR goes fishing, and we see that he always liked composing little like rhyming lyrics. So we have some idea that this is just something he's been doing himself forever, so that it doesn't seem like it just sprung up when he starts writing lyrics later.
And then bad Terminator drives up in a truck.
So bad Terminator drives up in a truck, and Jack is dying because table saws are dangerous. We also establish that Robert Patrick hates the radio.
Yeah, like he brings little JR to Jack's bedside, and Jack looks like he's basically just like tied together with fabric so he can die more slowly. I don't know what kind of medicine they were practicing in the South during this time period, but it looks like they've just like tied the sheet so to hold in his guts long enough for him to be able to say goodbye to his family. So he dies, and then they're in the house, and his dad's doing this thing that my mom used to do when I was a kid, when she was pissed, and she would just like close things loudly. Yes, it is.
I believe the partial terminology for that is haunting the house. There are many different methods of haunting the house that mothers develop, and slamming is one of them. And not even the scariest.
And then, his dad really lays it out there. The devil did this. He took the wrong son. And his dad holds true to this belief for the next 2 hours.
I also wanted to mention that Bad Terminator does not age throughout this movie.
No. But he's got like that like old man thing. People don't age this way anymore. There's certain eras in America, I'm thinking of the Great Depression, where like people didn't age as much as they just like withered up and died. And he's got that look, like where you're like, he isn't aging. The world is hollowing him out until he dies.
Yes. So fortunately, we are done with this awful childhood full of handsaws and lonely fishing trips. And we cut to grown-up JR leaving for the Air Force, which is when he becomes John. Mom gives him her hymnal. Dad couldn't care less and berates him for going to Germany instead of Korea. And I think you mentioned in the lead up to this, Joaquin Phoenix is much more attractive than Johnny Cash. So it's another case of the expected phenomena that I call YouTube, where whoever plays someone in a movie will be more attractive than that person, because to make it as an actor, you have to be at least 1 or 2 points ahead of the average on your worst day. And there's a beautiful shot of cornfields and him walking through the cornfields that made me think of the first Superman movie.
That's an almost perfect movie.
So we are now in Europe, and another common trope of these movies occurs where John is on the phone with the first wife who doesn't get him and wants him to be ordinary. She does not share his sense of adventure. She doesn't care about going to Venice, Italy.
Okay, I have a couple of things to say about this. First of all, Johnny Cash acts like his life is being like pushed upon him. He actively is courting this woman and asking her to marry him. Like, he acts like, how come I'm so unhappy? And it's like, you are the architect of your own unhappiness and you're bringing everyone with you, you asshole. I find that quality of him in this movie really annoying.
They make Vivian out to be this shrew. You do see some scenes between them that are loving. But so in real life, they wrote to each other every day when he was in the Air Force, and there's a documentary about her. Also, it's a case where the person isn't famous enough for anyone to care, but Ginnifer Goodwin looks nothing like the real Vivian Liberto Cash. If you look at pictures of her, she was Italian Catholic, but if you look at photos of her, like, there was a scandal where she bailed him out of prison, and it was reported that Johnny Cash was married to a black woman.
Oh, wow.
But you had some things here about Joaquin Phoenix's behavior toward the secondary female co-star of this film.
Yes, so I have hot tea from the mid-aughts, a time of great gossip. So Ginnifer Goodwin supposedly had an affair with Joaquin Phoenix on the set of this movie while they were filming it. And because he is in that category of method actor that's not really understanding what method acting is, So he supposedly broke up with her the day before they filmed the scene where they break up in the movie, which is fucked up. And his spokeswoman at the time denied the affair took place and was quoted saying to the New York Post, "Can you have a romance without going on a date?" Which is A, not a denial. And B, my response to that is, of course you can. It's called a showmance. I have seen so many of these things.
Cash and Vivian were married for 13 years, but in this movie, this marriage feels like it lasted for not 13 years, but 1300 centuries. You just want it to end already.
He seems to marry her and then he's immediately regretful and refuses to do anything about that except make everyone around him super unhappy, which is cool.
Yes, so he's talking to her on the phone while he's in Germany, and a mean officer kicks him off the phone. And I feel like there's a kind of recurring motif in this film about phone conversations that are cut off or unsatisfying or don't reach a conclusion as a metaphor or as foreshadowing of whether your relations with someone will be satisfying. They're watching a movie about Folsom Prison, which leads to him composing Folsom Prison Blues. This did not happen at precisely the same time, and Johnny Cash was honest about it later. It's part of the mythology that he saw it and immediately started writing those lyrics with that as the inspiration.
Interesting. I hadn't noticed the phone thing, but now that you say it, you're absolutely 100% correct. I have an immense sympathy for this woman. She got married to him and he made all sorts of promises to her about the life they were going to have together. He knocks her up at least thrice. Wait, no, 4 times. We just didn't get the 4th child in the movie.
They had 4 daughters.
He's like a complete trifler and he's completely uncommitted to the family he started. And in the end, he's going to cheat on her constantly and leave her. And we see here too that thing that we talked about in Coal Miner's Daughter, where you just like run into rock stars and musicians in town, which I still stand by the idea that that's so cool.
It feels very fan servicey for him to just happen to overhear Elvis recording Milk Cow Blues at Sun Studios, which is a thing that happens when we cut to Memphis 1955, and John is a terrible salesman. So Vivian berates him, and it's sort of like building up to the first time that he's going to say, "Hi, I'm Johnny Cash," which the way that he says this is inimitable, but we hear him getting practice saying, "Hello, I'm John Cash." We see him picking up inspiration from various things that he sees walking around. And Sam Phillips slams a door in his face, or someone at the studio slams a door in his face. We see him practicing on the porch with what is currently the Tennessee 2. None of them can really play all that well. They're singing about Jesus, and Vivian, shock, is not happy.
Yeah, she's crying because he's a trifler. And for someone who claims he wants to be in music, doesn't know dick about how to actually do the work to get into the industry. And she's like, "I want to go home to my dad. He has a job for you." And he's all, "You just don't understand. You're a terrible human being." And she is on child number 2.
So the song Time's A-Wastin', which he will later sing in duet with June, comes on the radio to underline that he has always been destined for June Carter. Vivian is also mad because they can't make rent, so he arranges an audition with Sam Phillips, and it's urgent because he does not want to work for Vivian's dad.
He doesn't even know how one gets on a label or records. I can't underline enough the fact that he has done no work to try and break into this industry. And this is such a great little performance by Dallas Roberts, who is a character actor, where we see what a great producer he is, because not unlike Dr. Dre, he knows how to pull great art out of a person in a hurry. And this is an exquisite scene and I loved it because you know how I love seeing people do the work.
I was thinking that myself, that in that lecture that he gives him on, is this what you would sing if you were dying? Yes, that we see the producer pulling a performance out of someone. And you know what? I don't think he'd still be in the room if he didn't think there could possibly be something there. But yeah, it's the same thing that we saw Dre do, where he makes Eazy-E into a rapper in Straight Outta Compton. And that was a great moment here.
Yeah,
actually.
This was like one of the high points of the film for me, just because it was really compelling and there were stakes to this scene. Yeah, and they bust out with Folsom Prison Blues like it's nothing.
Yeah, and you see that like the guys behind, that his backing guys are just like catching up. It's kind of a miracle. He's wearing black because he says because it's the only color they all own. And one of the things that the wardrobe people do with this is actually something that frockflix.com pointed out, is they do a good job at mixing the textures and fabrics on things where people are wearing black so that you don't just see a bunch of voids.
Good job, costume designers.
And this is in some way, like watching Sam Phillips react to this is sort of like the 3-step backward walk from a complete unknown every time somebody hears Bob Dylan play for the first time. And he comes home in the rain, and Viv is actually happy for him for once. And he announces that they made a real record, and we cut to Jerry Lee Lewis singing on a tour.
This man is such trash.
Yes, he is trash, and it is time for us to sing the Child Bride medley with the girl's age. She was only 13. Only 13. You're 13. You're beautiful, and you're mine.
13. You're my cousin, and you're mine.
So
I think he might be the only person in history who was actually canceled. And I don't think he would be canceled today because we like just let fucking monsters run roughshod over our country. But at the time, people were outraged by this, and they should be, because he married his cousin who was 13. And if you're not repulsed by that, please turn off our show.
Yeah, we don't approve of child marriage on this show. Should be a pretty easy thing to disapprove of. One time. So he sees June Carter backstage, and Reese Witherspoon is adorable, and she's wearing a puffy dress, and you know how much I love that fit and flare silhouette with the poofy sleeves and the nipped in waist and the big skirt, and she's wearing that, and it's adorable. And he is starstruck, and oh boy, do they have a meet cute. It is classic meet cute, the thing where people bump into each other, literally. She bumps into him, and she gets tangled in his guitar strap, and she makes him laugh.
Reese Witherspoon is outstanding in this movie. And she is, like, at this point, like, such a cutie pie and knows how to play the audience, and she wants to get in his pants.
So, IRL, she did not tour with Johnny Cash in the 50s like it looks like here. They didn't go on tour together till the early 60s. And also, for the first time, he says that distinctive, "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash," that I did not get even like 1% of. So there is a frustrating phone call home. And we see that, like, June just makes everybody happy. She knows what to say to people. She, like I said, she sets everyone at their ease. And here I have a note. So Elvis is sitting backstage, and he says that Mama Maybelle Carter kept June in a crib backstage at the Ryman when we're assuming they would have been on Grand Ole Opry. So I thought, did June Carter's mother, Maybelle, actually keep a crib backstage at the Ryman? But this is impossible, because June Carter was born in 1929, and the Grand Ole Opry did not move to the Ryman until 1943, when she would have been 14 years old and hopefully no longer in need of a crib. I also found out that the Carters did not premiere at the Opry until 1950, when she would have been 21. And I suppose it's important that Elvis couches this with "they say," so that this is something he has heard as hearsay, not a fact.
Well, two things. Elvis was not smart, so it's possible that he, misunderstood this information. And I think actually just one thing. Elvis wasn't smart.
He had good taste when the Colonel wasn't picking for him.
Yes. And also, welcome back to the show, Elvis. Glad to see you again.
Many movies about Elvis and tutors. And we've barely touched on the many, many Tudor films.
Is Elvis America's Tutors? Did I just blow your mind?
Oh, yeah, because there's that same issue with the line kind of dwindling, where Riley Keough is in the Elizabeth I spot now.
Yes.
or maybe Priscilla is Elizabeth I. Who knows?
I mean, the Joker is America's Hamlet.
Yes.
So why not?
So he runs into June at the diner, and she asks him about, I love how she describes his sound, sharp like a razor, steady like a train, or something. And, she's excited about music, unlike his wife. He talks to her about his brother, which we've never seen him talk to his wife about. And I keep wondering, do I see this as cliched because it's the template, or was it already a cliche when it came out?
I don't know, but this is certainly a trope of the man has the wife at home who won't shut the hell up about the rent and getting groceries, and why aren't you ever home? And then he meets the interesting girl on the road.
Yeah, and at these moments, the country singer that June Carter reminds me the most of is Lurleen Lumpkin from The Simpsons, who sings, "And your wife don't understand you, but I do." So we see that June is kind of self-deprecating. She says that her sister Anita is the better singer, but this is one of those things where what makes for a good singer in the American popular genres isn't necessarily that you have the best set of pipes or the best training per se. It's something that comes down to grit and edge and authenticity.
I was listening to June and Johnny singing together in real life. I find her voice very lovely.
This movie does a lot to whitewash what was going on, because first it brings her into his story much sooner than it happened, and IRL she chased him harder than this. And Vivian wrote her own memoir. Vivian has a documentary, and she did do that with Johnny's blessing because I guess he felt like that was what was fair. And we also know that the script had the blessing of both John and June Carter Cash.
No, she's very respectable, and she has very good boundaries throughout the film.
So the Cashes are moving to a bigger house, and Viv is being a shrew and doesn't care about anything that matters to him, and he's exhausted, and she is mad about all of the letters that he is getting from groupies, and I swear there is a scene exactly like this in Dewey Cox.
He just looks so annoyed and so put upon to have to even be there with his wife and listen to her shit and spend time with his children because he just wants to be back out on the road.
I think that Roseanne is the child they name drop the most here, but June is with them on the tour, and Jerry Lee Lewis says they're all going to hell. And this leads up to where they arrive at the motel, and he puts the moves on her. Right, we see boys will be boys because they set off a bomb in a tree. It's great fun. A branch breaks off. They learned nothing from, table saws are dangerous. Let's try bombs. Those should be good, clean fun. And then someone offers him some pills to deal with tiredness, and they say, Elvis takes them. And sure, Elvis takes them as proof that these pills are okay. As we now know, Elvis does it as a terrible reason for doing anything. And I also noted here that Joaquin Phoenix does a good job at holding his face like Johnny Cash when he's singing.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It is it's a very committed performance that he gives. And he did a lot of work to get there. Like he really worked on nailing the voice and the way he spoke and the mannerisms, to the point where Roger Ebert, who was apparently a hardcore Johnny Cash fan, was shocked when he found out that Joaquin Phoenix was doing the singing, because he sounded so much like Johnny Cash. He also maybe had a breakdown during the making of this movie. It's a maybe. No one really knows for sure. He's denied it, and other people have denied it, but he did also check into rehab post-film for drugs and alcohol, according to the internet. So, bear that in mind. Joaquin Phoenix is a very good actor in a lot of things.
Well, every time I look at Joaquin Phoenix, I regret the career that his brother River didn't get to have.
Yeah, it's a huge bummer. I happen to think, just because of the way my brain works, I happen to think Joaquin Phoenix is more attractive than River. I know you're
you like weird and I like pretty boys.
Exactly. But yeah, I think it's such a profoundly sad loss for this very specific thing of acting, that we didn't get to see him grow, because he was so good already.
So he has groupies all over the place, and this movie is fan servicing all over the place with its little cameos. We have a Roy Orbison appearance. We had Elvis mention chili fries. James Mangold loves his fan service moments, and he goes back to his miserable home with his shrewish wife and his I don't know how many daughters there are at this point.
I think there's still just the 3. Yeah, this is a movie that is a cycle of 3 things. Going to his house where he's profoundly unhappy, will they, won't they scenes with him and June, where both of their faces are really close together and they're almost about to do something, but they don't. And then performance, and rinse and repeat. It is constant. That is the whole movie, and it happens 6 times. You did mention the Five and Dime General store that she went into, where they run into each other. I was obsessed with this store, because I don't know if you've ever gone to a 99-cent store on Fifth Avenue in Brooklyn, but it is exactly that, where they have brooms, and they have towels, and they have toilet seat covers, and they have tissues, and they have cards, and they have old lipstick, and then they have a whole display of those Taki chips, and it's everything and nothing all in one place. I don't know if you were scoping the background, but that was me.
Yeah, that store has everything. Johnny is looking for something to send home because he forgot his daughter Roseanne's birthday, and June runs into a heinous proto-Karen who does not like divorce.
She gets accosted by a woman who basically tells her that they still think that she's a good person even though she is divorced. June goes on a really interesting journey in this movie, and her character grows and changes, and Johnny Cash stays exactly the same. For the subject of this movie to have absolutely no emotional growth whatsoever for 90% of this film, but to see his counterpart really evolving as an artist and as a human, essentially in the background, is a real choice, because he just has fits and does his drugs and gets drunk, and we see her really growing as a woman.
She's always great at dealing with people, and they go fishing together, and she shows him how to use the rod and reel, because I guess he's just been fishing with a string on a stick up to this point in his life. And he finally has a satisfying fishing trip with some companionship on it. And this is when he pushes her into singing Time's a Wastin' with him. He is really unprofessional on stage a lot, and she is always professional. And he is mad over being rejected by her. So here comes another very common trope of these movies, property destruction, where he smashes up the bathroom, he pulls a sink out of the wall, he takes some more pills, and once again, how many innocent appliances, how much helpless plumbing, how many blameless pieces of furniture, how many guiltless, inanimate objects must suffer in the name of artists' emotional development.
Also, like that poor theater owner, because he tried to kiss her and she didn't want to kiss him. He goes backstage like a giant baby and rips out the plumbing because he's horny and needs his pills.
It is hard to rip plumbing out of a wall.
Yeah.
I've never tried to do it. And what about all the other people who need the bathroom and have to deal with a big old puddle on the floor, huh?
It's so shitty.
Yeah.
And then he's hanging out with his boys and they're all drunk on hanging out in the theater, like breaking stuff. Again, the poor theater owner.
Yeah, and June is mad at them for being up all night because they have a show in a few hours. And she is right. They are all being very unprofessional. And I'm sure they all smell fantastic from speed sweats.
Ugh, yeah, they're being real jackasses.
They really are. And no woman could ever get away with behaving like this. She yells at them, "You can't walk no line." And within the movie, this inspires him to walk the line. But in real life, he wrote Walk the Line for Vivian about trying to not cheat on her. And they move to a bigger house again. And we cut to 1964, where he's talking about Bob Dylan. And I guess part of the point here for me is that people who really love music don't discriminate based on subgenre. That he gets Dylan, even though Dylan has a completely different audience.
Yeah, and he's writing a letter. He's writing one of his many letters that we saw him writing in A Complete Unknown, and he wrote one on the back of the barf bag on the plane. And and Vivian's like very dismissive of this and
I don't
resentful.
understand it was paper and it was there. I don't see what her problem is.
She's just like, she is a villain, and anything she can be a villain about, she is a villain. His dad is also visiting, and his dad continues to be super disappointed in him. There's like nothing Johnny can do right.
He's not impressed with anything his son does. And we've seen somewhere in here, June has remarried to a stock car driver who we never meet, much like her first husband, and they'd be superfluous anyway. And then they're at some awards show. I think this might be the Grammys. I'm not sure. And he's messed up, and Vivian's not having a good time. Nobody is having a good time dealing with this man.
No, and he sees June and completely like does that meme of the guy who's like looking the other way when a girl walks by, like completely like does that. And Vivian clocks it and is not happy about that. And he completely like goes neg on June, and he's like, will this marriage stick? What is this? The second, the third? And then he chases her down and grabs her arm, which I hate. And is like, no, we need to go on tour again. And so they make a plan to go on tour again.
She looks beautiful in this scene.
Yes, she does.
And they do such a great job with her hair. And I do notice that they soften a lot of things about what people in country looked like in this era to be more pleasing for people watching in the aughts, because that was not an era for large hair.
She looks beautiful. Reese looks beautiful throughout this movie. Then they go back on tour. And this is the point where I was like, James Mangold of 2005 could sue James Mangold of 2025, because they are singing It Ain't Me, Babe, similar to Bob Dylan and Joan Baez. And singing it while Vivian is sitting in the audience, and she gets that, oh shit, they're doing it look on her face, just like Elle Fanning did in A Complete Unknown. And I'm like, this is like the time that Creedence Clearwater Revival's label sued John Fogarty's label, even though he was the lead singer of Creedence Clearwater Revival, for musical plagiarism. Like, James Mangold, find another way. You repeated a scene from your own movie. Like, if this is like, I'm going to use my favorite word, auteur. Like, if this was, like Martin Scorsese imitating John Ford, that would be one thing. But this is James Mangold imitating James Mangold.
Does Martin Scorsese ever imitate Martin Scorsese?
I mean, I think every artist can become a caricature of themselves at some point. I do think that he has a style that he uses repeatedly, but I think that it's completely earned.
Okay.
But James Mangold being like, you know who I should rip off when I make this scene? Is I should rip off my polished but kind of not great biopic from 2005 that was made to win awards in my 2025 version of that.
Yay.
Anyway, it's so on the nose. And I guess It Ain't Me, Babe is the song you sing in front of the partner you're cheating on with the person that you want to be with in order to indicate to them that you are cheating and you're happy about it.
Well, I lost count of the number of times they sing Jackson in this movie, and I do love that song. It occurred to me that a thing about writing scripts for musical biopics is that you can use song lyrics that everyone already knows and loves to underline emotions much better than you can use original dialogue, which is probably not as beautiful as those song lyrics, because an effective and well-directed actor should be able to read a toothpaste ingredient list and imbue it with the sense of emotion and specificity that one would give to a marriage proposal scene or a funeral oration or To Be or Not to Be. And this is one of the reasons why I can't be an actor, is because I've heard that theory in acting that the words don't actually matter. It's the physicality and the emotion. And that's where I was like, I am deeply cerebral and a words person, and every aspect of this is completely antithetical, not just to the comfort zone I need to get out of, but to me and my wheelhouse and where I'm best. But song lyrics make this really easy. But having them sing It Ain't Me, Babe is kind of on the nose. The way that they use lyrics and song choices is quite on the nose. And I suppose that's something that audiences liked about watching them, because June Carter and Johnny Cash had been together in the public mind for a long, long time before they were actually married. But boy, is Viv mad. I don't know if this is just a thing where the movie has to make her the shrew and has to make it so clear that this was a starter marriage. So anyway, finally they bang, not his wife, June, and then he won't share peanuts with her the next morning, and this is supposed to be cute, and then her daughter calls and she decides that she can't do it, have an affair.
And then he's taking pills, and like we're leading up to, essentially like the Jesse Spano moment where we're going to sing Ring of Fire while sobbing about how we're so scared. Like the pills are building, and then they go on stage and he has his drunk embarrassment on stage scene, which we have seen
many times.
I did like a modicum of research for a change. This never actually happened in any recorded point in his career.
He did get thrown out of the Opry.
He definitely like kicked some stuff and clearly broke some stuff, but I guess he never shit the bed this hard.
Because he comes on stage and makes a mess of the song Stripes. And there's a reference to that moment of quoting Looney Tunes with Jack that I had totally forgotten about. I don't know whether to appreciate this as being light-handed with a trope for once. Again, June is the only professional in this movie. So she says she doesn't love him. He calls her a liar. She flushed his pills, and it looks like she did a thorough job getting rid of all those pills. There's a fan service moment of her saying, it burns, and then writing Ring of Fire. And Johnny has to go to the border to cop. And we have the obligatory arrest scene. And he comes home to Viv. And this is the point where I wrote, how much longer do I have to put up with this marriage for? I'm sure Viv is thinking the same thing. And she's mad at him because he's hanging some pictures, which include pictures of June.
Yeah, she is pissed. She starts like angrily making a sandwich, and Johnny is blasting Highway 61 Revisited. They get into a very physical fight, which, as the lore mentioned earlier in this episode, apparently they had just broken up in their showmance, and he passes out outside at the pool. And then the next thing he knows, Vivian is leaving with the girls and driving away. This is a thing that we see a lot in movies where we see shitty dads yelling and screaming about how you can't take the kids. And I'm like, Johnny hates his whole family. He is rolling his eyes at them the whole time he is with them. He is annoyed that he participated in the creation of this and acts as if like somehow this all just happened to him. And I'm like, why aren't you thrilled that they're leaving? Because this is what you've wanted the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that hate is also inspired by addiction in this, because Johnny is an addict.
And they do a good job at making him look pale and hollow-eyed and sweaty. He looks so sad sitting next to his gorgeous swimming pool. And we see that Shooter Jennings shows up as his dad, Waylon Jennings, and the living situation is fairly pathetic. Moving in with a member of the Jennings family is a sign that you are past giving a damn about how badly you've messed up.
This employs a technique that I've discussed in the past that I love so much, which is when like we cut to a year later, and through a series of events throughout that year that go entirely undocumented, we are now like really unsoberly living with Waylon Jennings. And I'm like, cool. I love when I don't have to worry about how it happened. It is just happening.
I don't think I want to see the train of events that lead up to moving in with Waylon Jennings is probably convoluted, and no single one of them is all that interesting.
Yeah, I think it's probably just like the rich hobo's journey.
He hasn't paid the phone bill. He needs to go cash a check for $30,000. But this scene with the bank clerk is so ripe for parody. And I feel terrible for this bank clerk emotionally managing a strung out Johnny Cash. And this is what happens when you have to cash a very large check. Like, they do have to put a hold on it. And she says, no, don't do that. But I feel more for her because the record company can always cut Johnny Cash a new check if one expires. And it's insane where he rips it up and he's like, how is this useful? I can't do anything with it.
He's such a baby. He's just like such a drunk, like man baby. And like taking emotional hostages everywhere he goes. And at this point, he shows up at June's house, and it seems that he has walked there.
Is it possible to take Waylon or Shooter Jennings emotionally hostage, or are they just kind of there?
That's a great question. I don't know that you can take a Jennings hostage. I'm going to be thinking about that all week. Just like, yeah, your other question.
Yeah, you're going to be thinking all week about, is it possible to take a member of the Jennings family emotionally hostage, and how would Scientology be different if it had been founded by Ed Wood instead of L. Ron Hubbard?
I love the questions you ask me, Rena.
Thanks, Sarah.
I'm going to guess that it's quite challenging to take a member of the Jennings family hostage.
Because it seems like Waylon doesn't care whether his phone works. Like, his chaos is...
It's gonna make a great song.
He abides. So, After showing up at the Carter residence, he meets Mama Maybelle, which makes me think that all he's ever wanted is to be adopted by the Carter family. He gets a self-love, tough love speech from June where, oh my God, this thing about you have to learn to love yourself has been said so many frickin' times. Just once, I want to see someone in a movie say, you need to accept that you're never going to love yourself, and really, you're not that terrible, and quit looking at your navel.
I don't think the solution to his problems is that he needs to think more about himself.
After this moment of being told that he needs to learn to love himself, he magically passes out in front of the perfect house. I love this house. It's not my style. I can't imagine what I'd do with it, but all human beings don't have to be the same, and I appreciate this house that he passes out in front of as it's being built and then just buys.
When I wasn't thinking about your Ed Wood question this week, I was thinking about, like, why am I not enjoying this film? Because it is well shot, it's well acted, it's beautiful, and I think that the screenplay is it's just so and then-y. And June even calls it out at one point. Like, she says to him, like, you make it sound like things just happened to you. And he does. And he's a very, like, passive participant in his own life. And we're just watching so much showy addiction and not enough about, like, what makes him an interesting performer. It's just like we go from, like, set piece to set piece of people acting histrionic. And we're just watching him be an addict and then watching him perform and then watching him be an addict. We're just, like, kind of moving pieces around and doing the same thing over and over. We're just seeing him be an asshole and never growing. He's a less hobgoblin-y Jim Morrison, which, like, okay, that's a story. This is, like, a biopic that could benefit from a different focus or structure. Get On Up is not a perfect movie, but it at least manages to capture all of the complex dimensions of a person who is an artist who has endured great trauma. It's not necessarily a structure that would work well for this particular story, but it's just like we need a different lens on things because we just keep doing the same three things over and over. And as I said, like we watch June grow. We watch her cope with the fact that she has been presented to the world in a certain way and navigating how she is becoming a very different person than that. And I would love to see more of that story. And I know that there is a June Carter Lifetime biopic starring Jewel, who is now an anti-vaxxer RFK stan. So don't want to participate in her art. But Johnny doesn't deal with his brother stuff until the very end, similar to the way Ray didn't deal with his blindness until the last 10 minutes of that movie. We don't visit upon his brother in a real way again until close to the very end of this movie. And it's not even done in the comparably elegant way that Ray constantly brought up that trauma. And I want to be clear, Ray is not a great movie, but every review I was reading was talking about how Johnny's, like, clearly haunted by the death of his brother. And I'm like, is he? Because we just, like, his dad is there to kind of, like, shadow that constant disappointment. He doesn't talk about it. He doesn't, like, get mad about it. I'm not saying I want to see this, but we don't, like, see, like, an apparition of his brother at any point. Like, there's no representation of that trauma in this movie, except, like, his dad being constantly disappointed in him. If there is one thing we have learned, it's that every artist has a parent who thinks they suck. That's my speech.
So his dealer, and, you know, I have to admit, I found the actor playing the dealer quite handsome, drops off from some pills, which is realistic because people don't get better all at once. And the Carters show up for Thanksgiving, and so do Bad Terminator and Mama Who Gave Up the Hymnal Book. Bad Terminator is not impressed with this gorgeous house and berates JR for getting a big expensive tractor stuck in the mud. And I wanted to note here that June's dad, Ezra Carter, is actually a super interesting guy. And I can't believe that, like, is this going to be the excerpt that I read? But her parents seem lovely. Like, they're giving an example of this is what a supportive family looks like. So he was a mail clerk, which actually made him a catch because he had a steady paycheck that was much better than most of the people where they live. And he would return home with all sorts of little treasures, including phonograph records and books, both of which were rare in the Valley. Eck loved to read history, religion, and especially technical manuals that explained how things worked, whether it was cars or electrical current. He also enjoyed building things, particularly projects that benefited his neighbors. Eck's most ambitious undertaking was bringing electrical power to the region. He started by building a homemade generator to provide current for his own house. Then he dammed up the local Holston River to increase the unit's power so that he could share the electricity with others. The Appalachian Power Company eventually bought the system from him. Lovely man. What a lovely, warm man.
Johnny's dad, he's like, your tractor's being wasted out there. And, I'm like, Dad, step into my office. Your son is Johnny Cash. You can live off his large ass. And the other kid wanted to be a preacher, and he couldn't even operate a table saw. I keep confusing it with a bandsaw, which is used to make more intricate rounded cutting, whereas a table saw is more for straight cutting. I'm not saying get over it. I know you don't get over the death of a child, but maybe start to like work it out before you fully become a dried up husk of nothing.
They have other children, so maybe he has better relations that we don't see with his other children because his other children are not Johnny Cash. Thanksgiving is a fiasco, and Johnny tries to get the tractor unmoored but winds up driving it into the lake, and June goes into the lake with him, and then the Carters, being lovely people, help him to detox. So we get a summary dead brother speech. Dad says, "Where were you?" He's like, "Where were you?" Like, yeah, you're supposed to be the adult here. And there are people in your life that you're never going to please. You're never going to get them to see eye to eye with you. You're never going to get them to share your opinion. And you just need to give it up.
There's no hope for any of us if Elton John's mother or Johnny Cash's dad can't like appreciate the fact that at least they're incredibly rich. Nothing good ever seems to happen at a rock star's Thanksgiving dinner. We saw the Doors, like, don't do it. Yeah, and it's also like it's incredibly selfish and addict-y that Johnny chooses to relitigate his brother's death in the middle of dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Because addicts don't choose their moments well.
Yeah, and there when he is drunkenly trying to get this tractor out of the mud, I feel like I saw a shadow of concern on Bad Terminator's face that was not followed up. Yeah, and then we have another scene we've seen a lot, which is the cold turkey sweat scene. And oh, furniture, it is time for more of you to die.
Yep, there it goes. Perfectly good chair. The Carters chase away his drug dealer with a shotgun.
I normally dislike guns, but I love the Carters chasing the dealer off at like shotgun point.
Yeah, you know they have that shotgun for hunting. Like, they don't have it for weird, like, psychosexual reasons.
He finally talks about Jack and makes peace, which is, again, we have seen this before. And it's partly that this movie is the template that the current generation of biopics come from. Maybe everyone does have the same dramatic story. Maybe you should traumatize your kid and they'll be famous.
It's a theory. And June says to him, "You're a good man." And I am like, citation needed.
Yeah.
'Cause no.
Yeah, they go to church, and then we see him reading letters from real prisoners, and I saw the name Glenn Shirley on one of them, which is a guy in Folsom Prison whose song he sings on that album.
he goes to his record company. He puts on his all black, and that's fine. But then he puts on the sunglasses, and I'm like, can you not be the dick wearing sunglasses inside? But he is. And the record company is pushing back because he's like, I want to go play at Folsom. And they're like, no, your fans will hate that. And someone's like, Dylan's gone electric. And I'm like, yeah, Johnny was there for that. So he knows that Dylan went electric, and he saw the fallout from that.
Furthermore, we have heard him listening to Highway 61 Revisited, so he already knows that Dylan went electric. It also appears that some time has passed because he had that album. He leaves Viv. An untold amount of time has him living with Waylon Jennings for an also unknown amount of time. He buys a house, throws Thanksgiving, so I feel like at the very least it has been over a year since Dylan went electric, and there's no need for the record company person to remind him of this. And really, these record company people, in terms of that thing where someone in an industry is clueless and we can laugh because hindsight, they are just hitting that trope again and again and again. Like, they are as bad as Mike Myers' character in Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah, and apparently the record executives were actually in favor of him going to play there. The pushback was on the recording of it. And he's all, I want to go play Folsom. I'll be there January 13th, and you can record it or not.
We return to the framing device scene, and the warden asks him not to play songs that remind the prisoners that they're in prison, and admits that he doesn't drink the terrible tap water in the prison himself because he's drinking Coca-Cola and he's probably going to get diabetes.
This was such a canny PR move on his part, is that he sees that water and he comes out on stage with it and holds it up and, and tells them, like, you guys are the real tough guys because you're drinking this water every day. And they love that. This looks like the first time Joaquin Phoenix is having any fun in this movie too, is in this scene.
Oh yeah, he's having fun. And like, you've said that there's this formula that includes sing on stage, but those scenes are fun to watch, and he's good at them. And he sings Cocaine Blues to Stick It to the Warden. And I heard that when they filmed these prison scenes that in one case there was a guy in the audience who had been in the prison so long that he'd been there when Johnny Cash recorded. June has this moment where she's looking at him appreciatively like, oh, this is the man that I'm in love with. And then he proposes to her on the tour bus.
It's a really bad proposal. And she very eloquently states several good reasons why she is not prepared to accept his marriage proposal at this point, and sets a really good boundary.
There's one point in here where she starts to talk about how they both have children from their other marriages, and how are they going to blend that together. And I thought of the Brady Bunch theme. And coincidentally, as I was thinking this, he says that he's not going to propose anymore, and she says, I hate reruns, as I had the Brady Bunch song in my head to underline this scene. And then she says she'll only talk to him on stage. So he proposes to her on stage during Jackson, saying that he can't sing the song with her anymore unless she marries him.
Couple things here, Johnny. This felt borderline abusive to me, and in literally any other context except in this movie where it's romantic, it's kind of not cool that he does this. He romantically proposes to her, basically saying he won't sing another word until she says yes.
The audience is going to be mad if she says no. Now, we know this was one of the great romances, and they were happily married for 35 years, although, of course, he wound up doing drugs again, and she actually had her own issues. But, in a moment like that, the audience is always rooting for the man. They're going to hate the woman for saying no. Have you ever seen a big public proposal where the woman says no?
I've watched videos where it happens, where someone proposes at a stadium. It's not great.
Does the woman manage to leave the stadium with her skin intact?
I don't know, truthfully, but I think, like, don't do this shit in public. Don't do it in public, especially after she has made it very clear that she is not prepared to accept his proposal at this point.
She finally says yes, and he lifts her into the air, so it's like a less aerodynamic Dirty Dancing. And there's a semi-reconciliation with Dad, which is more about him actually liking his granddaughters, not about him liking his son. And he tells him to retell some story about rescuing them from a flood with a door, and it's my first time hearing anything positive that bad Terminator may have done. And we see June fishing, so full circle, somebody has gone fishing on a beautiful day without having a fatal encounter with a table saw.
Or drowning in a bucket, like happened in Ray.
Yeah. So many ways to run out of siblings in these movies.
So on the awards front, as I said, Reese Witherspoon is excellent in this movie, and I don't want to take anything away from how good she was in the movie, because she is very good. And as I said, her character goes on a journey, and it's an enormously sympathetic and vibrant performance. I want to be clear that I'm not saying she doesn't deserve the award. I am saying that she was an anointed winner. It's one of those situations where she had no credible competition. Not that there wasn't other talent or other great performances that year, but nobody was taking this award from her. It wasn't a matter of discussion. She was going to get the Oscar.
Who was the competition?
I would say that probably the most sort of like significant comer in it would have been Felicity Huffman was nominated for this movie Transamerica, and she won the Golden Globe for that. I'm going to bet any amount of money that you would like to select that movie has not aged well.
No, that movie has not aged well.
Other nominees were Keira Knightley in Pride and Prejudice, which is a lovely performance, but it's like none of these people could compete. Charlize Theron for the movie North Country about mining, which was a good performance, but she had just won a couple of years before for Monster, so she wasn't going to get it. And Judi Dench for a movie called Miss Henderson Presents that I don't have a clear recollection of. I'm sure she was excellent in it, but you couldn't compete with the star power and with the effort behind getting her this Oscar. This is a rough ass year for the Oscars, because this was the year that Crash, one of the worst movies to ever win Best Picture, won the Oscar. When you look at the other nominees for Best Picture that year, it was Good Night and Good Luck, Brokeback Mountain.
Yeah, Brokeback Mountain should have won.
Yeah, Capote, which is a movie that I loved when it came out, and I watched it again recently because I was on a Truman Capote kick after this season of Feud. That movie is an outstanding movie. Like, these are all movies that, in terms of the cultural context and what has happened because these movies existed, they're so much more important than Crash was, not to mention all of them are better art. And then also Munich, which is my personal favorite Steven Spielberg movie. Did you have any choice dialogue? I had one piece of choice dialogue.
I saw that you had some, so you can read yours while I look mine up.
So when he is proposing to her on the bus and she is explaining why she doesn't want to accept his proposal yet, he says to her, "June, that stuff will just work itself out." And she says, "No, it does not work itself out. People work it out for you, and you think it works itself out," which I thought was such a wonderfully defining moment of what he was and their relationship. And also just like a hard truth. And I loved it.
My lines for choice dialogue were, "Parents aren't always the best judge of things. We're all going to hell for the songs we sing. And now you won't have to work so hard to make people think you've been to jail."
Good one. So that is Walk the Line.
Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher about how we score movies?
Of course. We rate our movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films, but specifically tailored to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
So for outward appearances, hair and makeup, I gave it a 9.
I gave it a 10.
For acting and casting, I gave it a 9.5.
9.
For passage of time, I gave it a 6. They told you what year it was, so there wasn't that much confusion.
I gave it a 5.
So for costuming, I gave it a 9.
I gave it a 10.
Yeah, I really appreciated what they did with black fabric to make them not look like voids. And also, I loved June's wardrobe, and I loved the way it shades from the 50s into the 60s, but also with, like, being slightly behind the times in some ways. For quality of the script, I gave it a 5.5.
I gave it a 4.
For accuracy, I gave it a 3.
Yeah, I gave it a 4.
Wow, we are really on the same page. For storytelling, was it cliched? Was it interesting? Was it inventive? I gave it a 2.5. We can no longer tell if there was ever anything original about this method of storytelling. I don't know how this would have looked different to me in terms of, is this cliched, if it were 20 years ago.
Yeah, this movie defines cliched. I gave it a 2. And I almost went 0, and then I was like, no, we save that for other things.
Uh-huh. For production value, I gave it a 9.
Same, 9. It looked beautiful.
For production, direction, decision making, I gave it an 8. I'm now thinking I was too generous, but lots of decisions other than let's layer on every cliche were good decisions.
Yeah, I gave it a 5 because I thought the aesthetic of the film was really wonderful. As I said, it's beautiful to look at.
And that is a thing with films in this genre. They have great acting, they're beautiful to look at, and they're cliched, and something's missing.
Yeah, and that's what I dinged it for. And then Do We Care? I gave it a 5, I guess.
I gave it a 4.
Yeah.
My total comes to 6.55.
Oh, 6.3.
The average comes to 6.425. Walk the line. You are mediocre. You did not earn a second opinion.
You are perfectly fine, is what it is. You are perfectly fine. Yeah, it's a fine enough movie.
Other stuff that you should watch or read or listen to instead?
I mean, I have no recommendations except Johnny Cash's whole catalog is rich with wonderful storytelling and details.
I was going to mention as well, American 4, The Man Comes Around, his cover of Hurt has made me cry on that. And also Johnny Cash live at Folsom Prison. And yeah, I'm sure that Rick Rubin would have run a mic cord 6 feet down into Johnny Cash's casket if he could have.
Hurt is the song that Johnny Cash probably would have wanted to be that song. That if he were in the gutter dying, that performance and that song is probably what, like it's I feel like that would have been the song.
Cried over different versions of that song, and it's always at that point where it gets to the line, "My sweetest friend, everyone I've known goes away in the end."
And also he covers Depeche Mode's Personal Jesus on that album, which was recently used in a weird Jesus Super Bowl commercial. And I was like, I don't think that's what this song is, but cool. There's no movie that I'm like, you need to watch this instead. But certainly, just dig into his music.
Retractions, apologies, and listener mailbag.
Before we go, we have to apologize for something we said in a previous episode that turned out to be misinformation. We are sorry for this.
We were wrong. Sometimes we're wrong.
Rena, what were we wrong about this time?
In episode 17, Get On Up, which came out last August, we praised a young actor, Nelson Ellis, for his performance as Bobby Bird. And we said this speaking as though he were still alive, when we already knew that his co-star Chadwick Boseman had died of cancer in 2020. I learned that Nelson Ellis died in 2017. Also, that his birthday and Chadwick Boseman's birthday were 2 days apart.
Okay, that's heartbreaking and terrible, and I am so sad. First of all, so sad that he has passed, and second of all, so sad that we didn't acknowledge that on the show.
Yes. And then last week, I made 2 mistakes. So, we spoke about there is a town in Germany that throws a Wagner festival where they do the ring cycle, and this festival was set up by Cosima Wagner, Wagner's widow, and the daughter of Franz Liszt. Cosima Wagner remains a thoroughly ghastly human being, whether I was right or wrong about this, but I could not pronounce the name of this town in Germany. So the town is written Bayreuth. It is spelled Bayruth. I variously said Beirut or Beirut as if it were in Lebanon. It turns out that this town in Germany's name is pronounced Bayreuth, which was not among my guesses.
Certainly wouldn't have been among mine.
Bayreuth, not Beirut, not Beirut. Bayreuth. I did not bother to research how to pronounce it correctly in advance, probably because I don't like the Wagners. But yes, I apologize for my oversight. My other mistake was that I did not know what the twisty columns that look vaguely phallic in Listomania are. It turns out that that particular style of twisty column that you see used to great effect in the altar at St. Peter's are called Solomonic columns. So I was wrong, and we're sorry.
We are sorry. I'm particularly really sorry about the Nelson Ellis information. He was wonderful in that movie.
He was. It was a gentle, subtle performance. I think that's it for this week.
Okay. If you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is @BioPicAPodcastStory. So do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Please also check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official ratings for all of the movies that we've done so far. And if you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about Star 80. This is a Sarah movie. I will be doing maybe 10 minutes of Google research for it because gritty movies set within the past half century are just not in my wheelhouse. And I am hunkering down for The Last Emperor and for The Alamo, which we have coming up in April.
Meanwhile, I have said on many an occasion, this is my absolute favorite biopic by one of the greats, Bob Fosse, and starring one of the greats, Eric Roberts. I'm super excited to talk about this movie and welcome you into this sick world of Paul Snider.
So, see everyone next week. And good night to the earnest and the cynical.
Good night, Rena.
Good night, Sarah.